As I mentioned to the Prime Minister and the Premiers before, we know President Trump's unpredictable. We have to find out what we need to do to make sure that we create the environment and conditions for companies from around the world to continue investing in Canada.
Yeah.
And
we are fighting the Americans. We are fighting the Americans everywhere they understand. We're fighting the Americans in the pocketbook. We have retaliatory.
Mark Carney and Ontario Premier Doug Ford hold their first meeting to discuss on strategies to beat Trump in his ongoing tariff war. Welcome viewers to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. The storm didn't arrive.
We have retaliatory tariffs on them. We just hit them again in the auto sector. We're fighting them on Fox News, which is what...
The tool in our toolkit, 100%. And as he continues to hurt Canadian families, Ontario families, I won't hesitate to do that. That's the last...
A single day. It built over months, a low, rumbling thunder that everyone in Canada could hear, but no one was prepared for. It wasn't a weather pattern. It was a political one, originating from south of the border. With a second term secured, Donald Trump had doubled down on his America First policy. The campaign rhetoric had hardened into real-world consequences, and the tariffs, which had once felt like a distant threat, were now a brutal, undeniable reality. They were not surgical strikes. They were a scorched earth campaign designed to punish and to coerce. And the primary target was the heart of Canada's industrial might, the auto and steel sectors. In the small, working-class town of Oshawa, Ontario, the first tremors were felt. For generations, the hum of the General Motors plant had been the town's heartbeat. It was the place where fathers and sons, mothers and daughters had built lives. The work was hard, the hours long, but it was honest, and it paid for mortgages, for hockey equipment, for family vacations to the cottage. Now, the hum was slowing. First, it was the night shift that was cut. Then, a production line was idled. The rumors, once whispered in break rooms, were now a deafening roar. "We're losing the contract for the F-150 parts," one foreman told his team, his voice heavy with the weight of the news. "The new tariffs make our components too expensive for the U.S. market. They're moving the production south." The shock on the faces of the assembly line workers was a raw, emotional punch. This wasn't just a loss of a job. It was the loss of an identity, a legacy, a way of life. The economic pain radiated out from there. Steel mills in Hamilton, the gritty city known as Steel Town, felt the bite of a 35% tariff. A small, family-owned fabrication shop in St. Catharines that had been building custom parts for American machinery for over 50 years was forced to lay off its entire staff of 25 people. "My grandfather started this business after the war." The owner, a man named George, told a local news reporter, his eyes welling up with tears. "He built it with his own two hands. Now a signature on a piece of paper 1,000 miles away has wiped us out." Just like that. This wasn't some abstract economic theory. It was personal. It was the human cost of a tariff war, measured in lost homes, broken dreams, and shattered communities. And at the center of this storm was a new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, a man whose entire career had been defined by a different kind of world. He was an intellectual, a Rhodes Scholar, a man who had navigated the complex, data-driven corridors of power at the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. He had guided nations through the 2008 financial crisis with a steady hand and a calm, reasoned approach. He believed in the power of diplomacy, in the strength of international institutions, in the rationality of global markets. He was, in every sense of the word, a globalist. He spoke with a quiet authority, his arguments built on a foundation of irrefutable facts and historical precedent. His public appearances were lectures, not rallies. He was the antithesis of the man he was now facing in the White House. Carney's initial response to the tariffs had been textbook. He had dispatched his top diplomats, his trade ministers, and his most experienced negotiators to Washington. They had presented charts and graphs, showcasing the interconnectedness of the Canadian and American economies. They had appealed to history, to friendship, to the principles of fair trade. The response from the American side was a dismissive shrug. "They don't care about your charts, Mark," a frustrated ambassador had told him on a secure line. "They care about political leverage. This isn't about economics. It's about humiliation." Carney felt a profound sense of powerlessness. His tools, the very instruments of his political and economic philosophy, were useless. The rules of the game had been changed, and he was left with an outdated playbook. He had been trained for a world of reason and order, but he was now in a world of chaos and brute force. What do you do when the person on the other side of the table doesn't care about facts, about history, or about mutually beneficial outcomes? You look for a new way to fight. Meanwhile, a different kind of leader was feeling the same pressure, but from a different perspective. Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, was a populist firebrand. He had built his political career on a direct, no-nonsense appeal to the average Ontarian. He was the man who promised to get things done, to cut through red tape, to fight for the little guy. His politics were built on gut instinct, on what felt right to the people he represented. He had a deep, personal connection to the manufacturing heartland of his province. His base wasn't in the global financial centers. It was on the factory floors of Windsor, the steel mills of Sault Ste. Marie, the auto plants of Oshawa. He understood the language of these communities because it was his own. Ford had been a vocal critic of the federal government in the past, often accusing them of being too disconnected from the real struggles of the provinces. But now, as the tariffs began to bite, his public posture shifted. He stood in front of shuttered plants, his face a mask of anger and frustration. "This is an attack on every single worker in this province," he had declared at a press conference, his voice rising with emotion. "This isn't about politics. It's about putting food on the table, and we will not stand for it." He had tried his own back-channel talks, reaching out to his own contacts in the U.S. political landscape, but he too had been met with the same cold indifference. Ford's power lay in his ability to mobilize public sentiment, to rally people around a common cause. But what do you do when the enemy is not a political opponent you can debate, but a powerful, unpredictable force that ignores your very existence? Ford was a fighter, but he was fighting in the dark. He knew he needed a strategy that was more than just rhetoric. He needed a way to hit back, to make the Americans feel the pain they were inflicting. He needed information, a plan, and a partner. The stage was set for a dramatic, unlikely alliance. Mark Carney, the cerebral globalist, and Doug Ford, the populist everyman. The two men, so different in their backgrounds, their politics, and their very approach to leadership, were now facing the same existential threat. The tariffs had not just caused economic damage. They had exposed a fundamental flaw in the Canadian response. The intellectual approach was failing, and the populist approach was hitting a brick wall. The only path forward, however improbable, was together. This was the dramatic irony of their situation. The two men who seemed to have the least in common were now the only ones who could save their country. They were an outsider and an insider, a man of numbers and a man of the people, a mind and a gut. And the fate of a nation would depend on whether they could put aside their differences and find a way to work as one. The gathering storm was here. It was time for them to meet. The characters in this drama were as compelling as the crisis itself. On one side, Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, a man whose life path had been a steady, almost linear ascent through the world's most elite institutions. He was a product of Harvard and Oxford, a former managing director at Goldman Sachs, a man who had stood at the helm of two of the world's most powerful central banks, the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. His professional biography read like a list of impossibly difficult achievements, each one more impressive than the last. He was a man of quiet confidence, his power stemming from his command of complex data, his ability to speak a universal language of finance and economics. When he spoke, he didn't raise his voice. He used precise, nuanced arguments, building a case brick by brick until it was unassailable. He was a strategist, a long-term thinker, and a diplomat. The political arena was not his natural habitat. He had entered it as a reluctant hero, a last resort for a nation that had lost faith in traditional politicians. He was an outsider in the political game, and he knew it. He didn't connect with people through handshakes and photo opportunities. He connected with them through the cold, hard reality of their economic well-being. His success had always been measured in GDP growth, in stable inflation rates, in the avoidance of a recession. He was a man of intellect.